All right. Appreciate it, Coach. Guys, I appreciate you guys tuning in. I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing right now, a lot of Tiger King you could be watching and all that. So really appreciate you guys choosing to jump in here with me. Kind of just a little background of how this all sort of came to be. It was kind of in a time similar to this. I was in a situation where we'd had a head coaching change, and you know how those things can go. One guy leaves because he gets an opportunity, and guys get scattered, left behind. And I actually found myself out of a job for about 3 months. And so in that time, I had never been a coordinator before. I'd only been an assistant coach, and didn't know what my next step was going to be, what level, any of that. But what I did know was I wanted to be ready for whatever it was. And so I wanted to put myself in position that if a coordinator job presented itself, I wouldn't be prepared when it was too late. I wanted to be prepared before it came about. So I set out to build this offensive system. And when I say system, I don't necessarily mean the X's and O's of it. If you guys are hoping to steal a bunch of plays or anything like that, this may not be the talk for you, although I'll be happy to talk with you later on about that. This is more about constructing the build and the language of an offense, and then you get rolling in your X's and O's direction after that. So for me, it was all about starting with the end in mind. So I think all of us, if you've never been a coordinator, if being a coordinator is something you want to do in the future, you have some kind of idea right now of what you want to do. Some of you want to throw it 60 times a game. Some of you are going to be under center triple guys. There's all different kinds of things. You have some kind of idea of what that's going to look like. So you got to decide, what is your offensive philosophy? As you can see, kind of just what you want to hang your hat on. But then the more important part is, how are you going to make that happen? So I'm going to share this other deal with you guys, and I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but just to get an idea, I kind of put on paper what my offensive identity was going to be. And so there at the beginning, you know, the super generic, thanks Captain Obvious statement, our offensive identity is to be schematically sound against all defensive alignments while creating the best possible matchups for our players. Okay, vanilla stuff. And then spend the next 3 or 4 paragraphs talking about how I feel like we can do that. And I'll be happy to go back to this later and talk more specifics. And I know Coach is recording this, so if guys later want to screen grab it, take a look at all this more, that's fine. But just to have an idea, have a philosophy of what you believe, and then this is what you send when you're trying to get an interview. This is what you send when a coach says, what are you about as a coordinator? The other 2 things is there's 2 questions you want to be able to answer concisely. And when I say concisely, you know, somebody asks you what you do on offense, you don't want to be well, we run a little inside zone, we run a little outside zone, but we run power and counter too. You want to be able to answer in an effective way and communicate what it is you do. So for us, somebody said, what kind of offense do we run? I'd say we're spread triple. Okay, we're a spread triple offense, and tag in everything else after that. I use the idea tagline, kind of like what sets you apart, what makes your offense different. And this is where you kind of get a little more in depth, right? Maybe this is where people are like, oh, what do you mean by that? So our tagline, our thing that our players hear me say all the time, the thing that made my head coach, Coach Davis, interested in interviewing me, I said, Coach, we're always going to play 11-man football. Well, that's no duh, Coach. We all play 11-man football. For us, what that means is, when I say 11-man football, we're not going to do the old I formation, quarterback turns around, hands off power, and now he's just standing and watching. In our offensive identity, it outlines that our quarterback is going to read something almost every play. 98% of our offense, whether it's a run or a pass, our quarterback is reading something. Even if we're running ISO, our quarterback technically has a pull read on ISO. So everything we do, he's going to read something. And that's kind of what I mean by 11-man football. He's always going to be locked in, always engaged. We're never going to play 10 on 11 and have our quarterback watch. And then talking the talk. So once you get to this point, once you know what your offensive identity is, it shouldn't be a secret. Your kids should know. My kids joke all the time about 11-man football. Our kids talk about spread triple all the time. Our kids know the lingo that we use, know what we're talking about. And then it even gets into position specific as well. You know, everyone's heard no block, no rock. Our receivers know that. Our receivers know if they're not going to block, they're not going to, not only they're not going to get passes, they're not going to be in the game. Our quarterbacks, dive, quarterback, pitch, dive, quarterback, pitch. They say it in their sleep. So be able to talk the talk to your players to the point that your players can talk the talk back to you. So once you kind of get the philosophy down and you know where you want to go, you outline it all, now you got to get into how it's going to look. What are the procedures going to be? Starting with your staff communication. Obviously, your coordinator, whether that's you, sometimes it's the head coach, is going to call the plays. Someone's got to communicate it to the quarterback. So it's kind of like a big game of telephone. Some people put themselves in a situation, the situation I'm in now, I am on the field and I communicate directly with the quarterback, kind of cut out the middleman. But there's a lot of guys that, you know, being up in the box, having that bigger picture, that's important to them. So at some point, there's going to have to be that level of separation, that a little bit of a game of telephone. So how are you going to do that? Who's that guy going to be? It's got to be somebody you really trust. What position is that guy going to coach? Things that you need to be able to break down and summarize and have an idea of how you want to do that. Are you going to be huddle or no huddle? There's not a ton of huddling going on anymore, but we kind of do what we call a sugar huddle. Offensive line and backs get in the huddle. Receivers go ahead, break out and get the signal and run it. But how are you going to be huddle or no huddle? Complete huddle, sugar huddle? How do you want to do it? Personnel changes. This was a big one that I think a lot of people don't think about. The worst thing in the world as a first-time coordinator is getting that first procedure penalty because you got 12 guys on the field. No head coach is very forgiving of that one. They're going to get on you. How are you going to do it? What's your communication process going to be? Who's the coach that's going to be putting up the signals or yelling it out? Who's that going to be for you? And then how are you going to communicate the play in? Are you going to be signal, wristband, old school, go verbal, have the quarterback run over on the sideline, get a play and go? How are you going to communicate it, and who is going to communicate it? All things that you got to think about as you're putting this together. Cadence operation. And, you know, everybody's a little different. It's not all ready, set, go. It's not all down, set, hut. You got to think about how you want to get the ball snapped and what it's going to mean. What are the words they're saying going to mean? How are you going to go on two? How are you going to have a dummy count? Things that you want to think on. And then sideline procedure in between drives, talking about getting the guys over on the bench. How are you going to discuss what took place that drive, what corrections need to be made? And part of how we do that, I'll discuss a little later when we talk about identifying defense and things like that. But who's going to be the one talking? Is your coach in the box going to talk to the coordinator first, then the coordinator is going to disseminate? Is the offensive coordinator and the O-line coach going to get together and then go discuss with the guys? These were all things while I was sitting there in my unemployment isolation, which is very similar to what we're living right now. These are all the things that I thought about and kind of pieced together before we ever even had an interview. Next is the offensive communication. You know, when you get to the point of who's going to communicate and how's going to communicate, then you got to know what needs to be communicated. And this is when you kind of get into the language of building your offensive system and talking about how you want to get all this information passed along. So obviously starting with personnel, I think most people are familiar with the numbering system, 10 personnel, 11 personnel, 21 personnel, all of that. We kind of do a hybrid where our kids understand what we talk about when we say 10, 11 and all that. But in order to create sub packages where maybe, you know, I want a speed guy in 11 on this one versus I want my flex tight end in 11 on this one, we use words as well. So ace for us is 11, but hero is another form of 11. So being able to break down all the different things you want to do in your offense and then catering your personnel to that. If it's not that case, yeah, 11, 12, 21, you can keep it a little more simple if you just want to have base personnel. Formations, obviously, this is getting your guys where you want them. That also ties in with the strength a little bit. For us, they can be one and the same, and they can be different. If we're going to be in 2x2, we're just going to say right and left, and our guys are going to know which way they want to go. It's when we want to get in 2-back, 3x1, all those kind of things that we start using some other tags. Your motions, obviously, some people are all about it. Some of you triple option guys, you're going to have motion every single play. Is it going to be implied? Is it going to be you need to tag it? Are you going to have to tag a certain receiver or back on the motion? Coding, for me, all of our plays are numerical. Whether it's a run, you're going to get a code, or if it's a pass, you're going to get a protection code. So the code is going to be important. And then concept, if we want to run, for example, zone back, we're going to tag that back on there. Or obviously, if it's a pass, we're going to give our protection code and tag our pass concept. And then variations, as you get into all the different things. So I got 2 examples of, obviously, here I got super complex, right? We're going to use every single one of them. Ace trips right, Z cross, 60 dance, or X under, okay? So we got one of everything there to get a playoff. Or we can just go rocket right 24. So either way, you've got to communicate a baseline of things, and you have to have a process and a language for how you're going to do that. So just having somebody that can communicate it on the sideline, whether it's the coordinator himself or a position coach that gets it down, and you can trust, like we talked about playing that game with telephone, to make sure that it all gets communicated the way you want it to. Obviously, if you're doing kind of like we do, sugar huddle, your receivers are breaking out. They got to know these signals. They may not be in a huddle. They got to learn them on their own to be able to know how to get it done. If you huddle up entirely and you're going signals, now obviously the quarterback's really got to be the only one that's kind of mastering that deal. The last piece that we really focus on, and I didn't realize how important this was until I got more down the line. And before I go, Coach, do we got a question?
Yes, sir. How much offense do you take into a typical game, and how large is your plan A?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one of the things I missed talking about, that offensive identity. There's a sentence down there at the bottom that was a big deal for me, and that's the idea of having a big kitchen and a limited menu. So within this system, within these codes and these numbers, I've got a way to line us up in every formation that exists and a way to run every play that exists. But obviously, we don't do that. We'd be one of the worst offenses in the country if we tried to do that. The key is finding out what your guys do well, and then that becomes your menu. So typically in a game week, I like to have 8 to 10 different formations. I'm a big believer in dictating to the defense how they're going to line up. So I'm going to watch the film. I'm going to see how they line up to particular formations. And then within those 8 to 10 formations, I want to try and have 4 to 5 runs and probably 5 to 7 passes. And the more carryover there can be, the better. So when you get the call sheet, it's going to look like, man, there's 12 to 15 plays in 10 different formations. You got 150 different plays on your coach. That's crazy. Well, if we're running zone out of 11 personnel 2x2, zone out of 11 personnel 3x1, zone out of it's one play. It's just out of different formations and personnel. So kind of that 4 to 5 run concepts, 5 to 7 pass concepts. You may have 2 to 3 extra things sprinkled in for third and short, 2 to 3 extra things sprinkled in for third and long, and then your goal line 2-point stuff. So the call sheet, if you just get it off the cuff, it might look a lot bigger than it actually is. But probably if you really broke it down, there's going to be probably less than 20 unique individual concepts or plays any given week. And then we're just going to dress it up with formations and motions and shifts and all that good stuff. So moving forward into defensive identification, we talked about that sideline procedure and coming to the sideline and being able to talk. What I realized is if you don't spend the time and not only as a staff figure out how you're going to communicate things, but also teaching your players exactly how you're going to communicate things. It makes that conversation there on the sideline a lot more difficult. When they're saying the plug backer, but you call them a will backer, now wires are getting crossed. It's hard to communicate. So we sit our guys down early on, and we're going to tell them exactly what we call every front. If there's a 3 technique front side, a shade backside, we're calling that over. And that's all we're calling it. We're not calling it, well, he was kind of leaning on Billy over here, but this guy was on the outside of Joey. No, it was over, coach. All right. Stunts and blitz. All of that's going to be named on. We name every defensive player. So we've got 11 names for defensive players. Buck, Will, Sam, Mike, nose, tackle, end, strong safety, free safety, boundary corner, field corner. My guy's got to be able to tell me, coach, the tackle came in the A gap, the nose stunted to the B gap, the mic plugged in the C gap. So that way, as we're communicating, we're all talking the same language. We're all saying the same things. How that applies when they shift over now. So if we're in a 4-down team, we're going to call the buck that weak defensive end. When they go 3 down, now the buck becomes that outside stand-up guy, so on and so forth. Coach, you had another question?
Yes, sir. Do you leave communication to the guys on the field, or do you communicate the defense identification from the sideline coaches to the field?
Yeah, so in drive, right, that's all got to happen on the field. Sometimes it's our quarterback checking something in a different direction because he sees a tackle where we want to nose. Sometimes it's the O-line switching the protection. But within a series, the guys got to communicate themselves. When we do that communication, when we're having that talk, is what we talked about earlier, that sideline communication, coming over and saying, hey, we messed up on zone. We got 2 yards. We thought we should have gotten 5. What happened? Where'd the leak come from? Who did we miss? If they're all safe, all 5 of my O-line say the linebacker, that doesn't help me because they got more than one linebacker. If they can all say, yeah, coach, it was the mic, he slipped, he backdoored the guard, that's why we didn't get what we were supposed to get. Helps us clean it up, knows who the culprit is, right? You never want to point blame, but you got to get the guy coached up in a short amount of time, and it helps us move forward in that way. So on the field, mid-drive, yeah, our guys got to be able to communicate it themselves and hold it down. And when we get over to the sideline, that's when we can really break it all down. So obviously identifying all that stuff, coverage, personnel. So I want to bounce back to that other deal I had there, this Word document. So this is our offensive manual essentially. So as you kind of go through it, and again, I won't read all this, but just want to let you get eyes on it. We talk about everything. We talk about huddle procedure, who is going to line up where in the huddle, what the spacing is going to be, how they're going to communicate. I didn't want there to be any questions. I wanted this stuff to be from day one. We go through this as the whole offense. They get a copy of it, and it's up to them to know where they're going to line up. And I'm a jerk about it on game day, not because, I want to just be that anal retentive guy or anything like that, but because when we're getting ready to go for a drive and I'm calling ace to get my 11 personnel in there, I want to be able to look at the huddle before we go out there. And if we only got 10 guys in the huddle or 9 in the quarterback, wherever we got to find, I want to see who's not standing in their spot. I want to know who's missing based on where everybody's standing. It's also big if somebody gets banged up, injured, however it is, we got to be able to plug and play pretty quick. So it helps us figuring out who's missing, where everybody's supposed to be at. Talking about no huddle procedure, I'm going to skip over that a little bit just because don't want everybody knowing exactly how we do our cadence. But sideline procedure, bench area, we got it talking about how we're going to sit on the bench to be able to communicate. We're going to put the O-line on one side of the bench, skill guys on the other side of the bench so the O-line coach can talk to all his guys, all the skill coaches can talk to their guys, and the OC can be in the middle, talk to both. All this stuff that seems like, man, this is really important when you're in a game and the bullets are flying and time is moving. Every second's going to count. And I learned pretty quickly, like, man, I'm glad I did all that. I'm glad I took the time during the downtime to be prepared, because I think that's what helped us get off to a fast start. Not that we were perfect. There were a lot of things we learned that first year coordinating, but just being prepared eliminates a lot of the headaches. So offensive identification, this is how we tag all of our offensive guys. So obviously you got more than 11 for all your different sub packages. I've been in offenses where the letters don't change. I've been in offenses where the letters do change, meaning no matter what, we got these 5 letters in the game for our skill guys. We got a quarterback and we got our offensive line. And that's what we did in my first year, actually. We had all the letters stay the same. To me, it made it a little more confusing when you started changing personnels and tagging things. And it also eliminated guys having to learn things that they didn't necessarily need. For example, if we're going to run Dancer J Bob, obviously we know that's only talking about the 5th receiver that's coming in the game. We're only going to run that in empty. So the tight end doesn't need to worry about Dancer J Bob. The running back doesn't need to worry about Dancer J Bob. So it kind of was able to allow guys to just focus on what they needed. And then here we talked about defensive identification. Obviously only 11, like I said, bandit or buck, boundary defensive end or boundary outside linebacker, defensive tackle, the 3 technique, or sometimes a boundary 4 technique, and so on and so forth. So again, just this is kind of the bare bones of it. If there's any other more specific questions that guys may have, I'm happy to answer them. Wanted to make sure we left some time for that. But again, just really appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, if there's any other questions, happy to answer them and go from there.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions for Coach, feel free to drop it in there. While they're doing that, Coach, do you want to just share your contact information? If anybody has any follow-up questions?
Absolutely. So easiest thing is Twitter. Got it on the phone, check it all the time. So you can see there I have my @Coach Skalaski. And I can, my email is just Charles instead of Charlie .Skalaski@as.edu. So if anybody has any follow-up, any other information you'd like to see, anything like that, be happy to share it.
Or even just even recruiting questions. You know, Coach has some experience, man, with the in the college game, and it's been a big help as far as just learning certain things about the recruiting aspect. Him and I were on a panel, and yeah, he did a tremendous job. So if anybody even has questions there, you know, feel free to do it, or find out more about the Apprentice School, because you know, him and I were talking before. It's very unique, man. It's very unique, and it's a really cool spot. And those dudes are working hard, man, playing some good ball. So now, Coach, let me ask you. Here's a question. Just in regards to obviously coming up with your offensive system. You know, in high school it's a little different, right? Because you don't get to necessarily pick your guys.
Right.
Okay, so how much is going, like, you know, say you know, you go in with the system, all right, and then depending on the year, I mean, maybe you just don't have the right crop. How big do you think it is to be able to adapt and cater to your personnel, or do you stay true to your guns and just roll?
Yeah, that was a big thing, like kind of the first year, because when you show up first year, even collegially, those aren't necessarily your guys, right? But you want to get them bought in. It kind of goes back to the beginning, like the big kitchen limited menu. So we got the ability to run a bunch of different things. There's got to be a baseline of philosophy of what you believe in. And for me, that's kind of the whole 11-man football idea. But for me, if we're running zone read or power read or veer triple, it really doesn't make a difference to me how we're doing it. I just want to be moving the ball down the field. When guys ask me what my favorite offense is, my favorite offense is the one that moves the ball and scores points.
Scores points, right?
So, I mean, it was a lot of fun. We have had game in the last 2 years. We had a game where we broke the school record and rushed for 414 yards.
Wow.
And we had a game where we passed for 358 yards.
Wow.
I don't know if there's a lot of offenses that have that much motility to like go back and forth and do both. And it all comes down to what we're seeing on film that week. What does this defense do? What we end up seeing a lot at our level is there aren't as many quarterbacks that can make all the throws. So teams will cheat in coverage a little bit, saying, you know what, if he can throw that 8-yard out, he can have it. Luckily this year we had a kid that can make those throws, and so we expanded the passing game a little bit. But Yeah, I think especially at the high school level and at the small college level too as well. Because I mean, we don't go out and just draft kids. I mean, we're not Alabama. We're still recruiting and getting the best that we can get, but there are some limitations. You got to be able to adapt to your kids. There was I got a lot of little taglines. I like Jimmy's and Joe's over X's and O's, man. At the end of the day, it's all about what your kids do well. For me, building this system though, I didn't want to have to change my language if I wanted to change what we were doing.
Sure.
We're still going to use the same language, the same process. We just maybe be running some different plays and things like that.
Do your skill players learn multiple positions so they are not limited to playing only in certain personnel groups?
The smart ones do. That's what we want. You know, that's always what you want. And you kind of learn kids as you go. There's some guys that can do that, and it's great, especially if they happen to be good players too. What tends to happen, what you see more often than not, is your superstar player has a hard time doing that, and then the kid that is just dying to get on the field, he finds a way to learn all 5 receiver spots. And that's kind of how it plays out most of the time. But when you have a good one that can learn multiple spots, it makes you really dangerous because now going back to like when you're watching film, hey, you know, their guy covering to the field isn't as good as their guy covering to the boundary. I wish we could get Jimmy over there. Well, let's just flip him and stuff like that. So that's definitely what you're after, right? You're after all your receivers knowing both spots. You want both your backs to know both running back spots, but it's going to be based on the kid and kind of their level of learning, how quick they pick stuff up.
No doubt. When doing a run play with the running back in the sidecar, where do you like his eyes to be?
Good question. So it's going to be a lot based on what it is, where we're going, what his aiming point is. I always try and let them know who they are reading on every single run play. So we get into our playbook, it's going to have their footwork, and it's going to have what they're reading to make their cut. We want to be north-south as much as we can. So, for example, when we're running zone, he's reading the B-gap defender. When that guard fits on the B-gap defender, whether he's gets him turned and we can get outside, or if that guy shoots up the field and he's got to wall him off, he's making a one cut and go off that guy getting north and south. So depending on the run play, we kind of let them know who they're going to be reading for their first cut. And then after that, we got to let them do what they do because that's what we pay them the big bucks for.
There you go. There you go. Anybody else? Any last minute questions for Coach? Coach, I appreciate your time, man, jumping on here. Obviously, you know, you would share your contact information. So if any coaches in here have any follow-up questions or if you know guys that may find this information to be useful, which a lot of us can, feel free, man, to pass that along and keep it going. But no, more, you know, definitely appreciate the guys that tuned in and got a chance to sit in on your talk. And obviously, Coach, thanks to you for taking the time out, man, to present.
Absolutely, man. Really appreciate you having me on. Really appreciate these guys taking their time to tune in. And feel free to hit me up. Any other questions, anything like that. Happy to talk some ball during this time, man. We can all use it.